Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos, and I can quote in elegiacs all the crimes of Heliogabalus. And if you can too, then you're probably a major general, and very possibly the very model of a modern one. Well, thank you for joining Musical Talk again, and I hope that you're going to enjoy the next 2 weeks' worth of episodes, because they're about the same show, but looked at from two different angles with several different people. And the name of that show is Curtains. And I do hope that you'll have heard of it. It's one of the last great shows by Kander and Ebb. And it is a musical theatre comedy. We simply don't get enough of these anymore. And it is, and I hope you'll pardon me if I say, the very model of a modern musical theatre comedy, and is to be praised for that. Set in 1959, it does two very different things. It is, in its own right, a detective story, a murder mystery, if you will, turned into a musical. And it is also that old theatrical conceit of a show within a show. And people have been doing that at least as far back as Shakespeare, and probably a great deal earlier than that. Now, for me, Curtains is one of those shows which has really crept up and up and up in my estimation over the last 10 to 15 years of its creation, to become one of my favourite shows. It really is one of those shows that when I hear that there's a version on, amateur or professional, I normally make a point of trying to go to see it. I've seen terrible student productions and I've seen brilliant student productions. I saw a wonderful production at the Guildhall a few years ago, and most recently it was on a national tour here in the United Kingdom in 2019 and 2020, and as you can probably work out from those dates, it was curtailed after having appeared in the West End over the Christmas period, which is when I saw it, because of the COVID pandemic and the fact that we all went into lockdown. However, a recording of that national tour was broadcast online as a streaming show as a fundraiser quite early on in 2020 once the lockdown had started. And I watched it again there as well. And that's not all. There was a version of it at the Edinburgh Fringe in 2022. And it's going to be these last two productions that we're looking at in this week and next week's episode of Musical Talk. This week, we're going to be talking to the people behind that Edinburgh Fringe production. And next week, I'm going to be talking to Tim Saywood about the streamed version of the recording of the British tour version of Curtains. And I hope that by doing it that way, that we will get an insight on a 360-degree basis of this fabulous Kander and Ebb musical show. Now, what of the show itself? Well, you probably know this, but it has a book by Rupert Holmes, who's no stranger to the detective musical, being responsible as he is for The Mystery of Edwin Drood as a musical, and it has music by John Kander and lyrics by the late Fred Ebb. Rather sadly, of course, Fred Ebb died during the pre-production period of the show, and so Rupert Holmes and John Kander stepped in to complete the lyrics. It's rather sad that not only did Fred Ebb die during the pre-production period, but so did Peter Stone, who was the person who came up with the original book, which was then subsequently completed and reworked quite significantly by Rupert Holmes. It takes a certain kind of dry, one might almost say gallows humour, to observe that the word curtains turned out to be incredibly prophetic to several of the people involved in the creation of this show. And the show is now starting to become venerable in the sense that it's nearly 20 years old. It first opened in Los Angeles in 2006, 17 years ago, and made its way to Broadway in 2007. It's been revived and produced on a number of occasions in America and across Europe. The first proper full-on professional version, as I understand it, in the UK, was at the Landor Theatre, which is a fringe venue, in London, and that was in 2012. And then it took until October 2019 for the show to come back in a proper professional version, which is the tour that I was talking about, which started in 2019 and closed prematurely in 2020. However, the show itself is magnificently vibrant, lively, tuneful, funny, clever, works as a detective story, works as a piece of musical theatre comedy, and is generally, I think, quite a spiffing show. That's certainly my take. I put it up there right amongst the first rank of musicals of the last 30 years, certainly. Others don't agree so much, as you'll hear in next week's episode. But that's us getting ahead of ourselves. Let's talk about this week's episode and what we're going to hear today. Well, as I say, the 2 episodes will be a look at the wonderful show Curtains by Kander and Ebb. And this week we're going to be talking to 3 people behind the Edinburgh Festival Fringe production. Now, that production of Curtains was created by USOG, which you will have heard before here on Musical Talk, because it's the Edinburgh University Savoy Opera Group. Now, they don't just do Gilbert and Sullivan, although they have done on a number of occasions and are rather brilliant, but they also do other shows too. And this year we were given a rather splendid version of Curtains. And I enjoyed it so much that I arranged to have an interview with some of the people behind it. And that's what we're going to hear today. We're going to hear from Katie Slater and Patrick Hall, who are the co-directors of the show, and also from Falk Meyer, who was the musical director. I think it's always interesting to hear what people behind a show have to say about not only putting the show on in a nuts and bolts kind of a way, but their take on the text and the music. And we're going to get that today very much from Falk, Katie and Patrick. And then, as I say, next week we'll be hearing from Tim Saywood as we review the UK touring version of the same show. But let's focus on today and hear from Patrick, Katie and Falk about the USOG production of Curtains from the 2022 Edinburgh Festival Fringe. Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast.
My name's Patrick Hall. I'm one of the co-directors on USOG's production of Curtains.
Hello, I'm Katie Slater. I'm the other co-director for Curtains.
And my name is Falk Meyer. I am the musical director for this production of Curtains.
Well, let's start with the most obvious question. Why Curtains? What is the draw of Curtains? And there's a deliberate pun there, but obviously we'll ignore that and just actually answer the question. You know, I think Curtains is a wonderful Kander and Ebb show, a late flowering, if you like. As you know, Fred Ebb died during the writing process, so one of the songs doesn't have a lyric by him, but in fact by John Kander. But I think it's a great show, and it hasn't really made its way to Britain too much. There was a tour a couple of years ago, and there's been lots of student versions, which I assiduously follow, because it's one of my favourite shows.
Oh, lovely.
But why did you pick it?
Well, it's a good question.
Yeah. We were meant to be doing Anything Goes, actually.
Oh, Cole Porter.
Yeah, and then we couldn't get the rights.
Because it's all over London.
It's the Barbican right now,
Mm-hmm. So we were just hunting for a show. None of us had heard of Curtains, I don't think. And then we came across it and thought it was perfect for Fringe.
Yeah. Well, I think we listened to the soundtrack first, didn't we? And the songs are so good that we then sort of started looking into it more, and then just decided to plump for it, really.
And a nice balance of kind of parts. There's a nice balance of male, female leads as well, which we liked.
It's quite ensemble-y.
Yeah.
You're quite right. It does have that draw, actually. I mean, there's an obvious lead, which is Choffey, Inspector Choffey, but he's a team player. So actually, those are great ensemble pieces.
Yeah.
So, how did each of you join the project?
So the way it works is you have to sort of apply to the society to do a musical at the Fringe. So I applied to direct Anything Goes, which
Anything went, unfortunately.
Which unfortunately didn't go. But then Katie then joined the team because I'd never directed before.
Oh right, crikey.
So they sort of said, yeah, you can do that, but actually maybe we'll want someone with you who's a safe pair of hands who can direct. Enter Katie Slater.
I had applied to by myself, not with a team, for Sweeney Todd, because it was just me, and joined this lovely team.
So did you end up doing Sweeney Todd in the end?
No.
You were cut. Haha.
Yeah.
Sorry, I do apologise.
But kind of ended up on a similarly dark musical in the end, actually.
Happier murders in this, I think.
It's interesting because we all applied kind of
It's
three
different.
different shows. So I applied for a version of Little Shop.
Oh really, of horrors?
For Fringe, and then Anything Goes was chosen in the end. Anything didn't go, and then we
You assembled.
We joined up and we assembled.
joined
We
forces.
did
We
curtains.
joined forces.
So you're musical Avengers in that sense. Fine, but Curtains. So was it new to you all?
Yes.
I'd heard some of the songs from it.
So you knew a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but once you heard it, you thought, actually, this does sound like the show, because you've done the full show, which is rare enough in Edinburgh. I assume you've done it at university, and now this is a transfer, if you like, or was it always specifically for the Fringe?
Just for the Fringe.
Oh,
Just
right,
for
okay.
the Fringe,
So with all the logistical, frightening stuff that's associated with that as well.
I don't
dear.
want to go into it.
Let us not talk about that then. but you know, bringing a show to the Fringe is a tall order, and doing the full show at a Fringe, you know, you actually even have a short interval, which is a commodity very few shows offer at the Fringe. I must say, I think Curtains will be a very difficult show to cut down. It's too good to cut down. It's a full thing in its own right, and that's what we get here in Edinburgh, or near as damn it. So you've got your vehicle, you know you're coming to the Fringe. When was this?
So this was about end of March, sort of start of April time, which was also the time when all of us had our exams and final essays.
A happy time, was it?
My dissertation
exam
was due.
season, yeah.
And then we did auditions in April.
Yeah. And we sort of we
A different kind of exam, really.
Yeah.
It was chaos.
We did so we chose the show and then decided to go for it, and then we all sort of in the weeks after then sort of like watched various versions of it, and only then sort of understood the full scale of the show.
Oh yeah.
Which we hadn't quite initially realised. So that definitely.
It was designed for Broadway.
Yeah.
And Kander and Ebb knew it was going to get to Broadway. So, you know, it's,
And it's it's a sort of parody of theatre, isn't it? So literally all of the theatre is used throughout. You've got trapdoors, you've got the flies, you've got the curtains. And
there's usually a drop bit of scenery as well, isn't there? Yes,
yeah,
quite.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to talk about the absence of curtains in a show called Curtains. Although I think you actually get around, because you're not in it is, I suppose, you're in St Augustine's. It's no such thing as a proscenium arch pretty much in Edinburgh during Fringe, but it is the audience facing a stage.
Yeah.
But it's usually a church, so it's been turned into a performance venue for theatre. But I think you have this, you have a lovely bit of big red cloth, which is symbolic of a curtain, because curtains are actually important in the plot.
Yeah,
there's a moment where the raising of the curtain is important.
Yeah, indeed.
And dropping it.
Caused us nightmares over the last few months.
Many
It's been
sleepless
We did
nights.
have to
very,
think about it a lot.
a lot of different
The venue
workshops.
was actually the first thing that was confirmed for us, because USOG managed to get it in I think late last year.
Oh, good.
So we always knew that we were going to be in this in the venue as it is, and we had a picture of it, we had an interactive map of it, and looking at only images of it, I was a bit scared about space and everything, but actually being in this venue, I think we're really fortunate to have such a large stage, a really decently sized pit, and a good audience size as well.
Well, Paradise in St Augustine's is one of my favourite places for musicals, just because it's got a good raked audience area, which actually makes a big difference, because there's so many conference rooms in Edinburgh, and actually if you're not in the front two rows, quite often you are getting hats and heads. But whereas on a rake stage for the audience, it's fantastic. And as you say, if you're sitting in the audience, looking on the stage, you get a good view of it from pretty much everywhere. It's a narrow stage, but quite deep. And then on the left, there's a kind of a largish alcove, which is where orchestras usually sit, isn't it? So you can't always see, sadly, the orchestra in action, but by goodness, you get the sound quality, which actually is the important thing.
Yeah.
And by the way, I think your orchestra is pretty smart. I want to talk about the score in a minute. I'm very keen to talk about
really?
it.
It's a big project. It was a project to do, but
well, I think it is a project. I mean, that's the point. It's a late flowering score by two veterans of Broadway. That's not going to be easy, and in fact, what it's going to sound. It's going to sound easy. Well, let's move on to this in general for the three of you, if I may. Curtains has a sort of reputation for being a throwback. It looks and feels and is set in the 1950s. It feels like that era of Broadway, and deceptively, it is a musical comedy. That's quite a dark one, as you say. The body count is higher than your average comedy. And when you, as an audience, if you're just coming to it for the first time, it sounds like an old-fashioned show. This could be Kiss Me Kate at one level, or Anything Goes, although it's a little bit earlier. It's probably more like a post-50s show, post Rodgers and Hammerstein, anyway. But it's not. It's much more sophisticated. It's got a much more sophisticated plot. It's a play within a play, which always allows for send-up and layering. Musically, as I say, it's a late flowering by a well-established team with lots of musical in-jokes in it. Also, musical tropes and indeed some leitmotifs. I mean, there's also you can tell me I'm wrong in a minute, but there's some, there's also some sort of musical hooks which are not associated with people, but there's I can't even describe it. It goes bumpty, 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 bump kind of thing when the curtains are going up and down, and that gets repeated. Yeah, exactly, which is so sort of almost hackneyed vaudeville Broadway kind of thing. But actually, it's a real hook, and it tells you something's happening. It's also funny. It sounds funny in its own right. There's so much to this show, I think. It's one of the reasons I like it so much, because every time I watch it, I find little extra bits musically or in the plot. So it's an open question, although I will be wanting to talk about the music. So shall we do it narrative first and then music? Would that be all right? So when did you realise, and I like your word project, when did you realise that this is more than just dialogue song?
I think when I kind of realised that they're trying to do a murder mystery aesthetic, a Western aesthetic, and it's set in the 1950s, I was kind of like, that could be a big mess. Because there's
I believe the word you're searching for is challenge.
Yes. 3 very different things going on, and really if we can't just make that whole and smooth in one thing, it could be chaos. And then obviously when we kind of realised how complicated the murders are that happen, especially the one in the curtain, I think that was when we're like, okay,
you
this
see
is
that
a lot.
one happening.
Yes, I think also when we were in the audition room as well, and we had sort of extracts from the script and obviously giving it to the auditionees, there are so many sort of smart convoluted jokes just like dispersed throughout, most of which we had to like go away and think about like what they were actually about, because like it's often not immediately apparent what they're referencing, or is it some kind of, as you say, like a musical in-joke. So we had to do quite a lot of like thinking about what actually a lot of the script was sort of saying, really, because a lot of the dialogue is so sort of smart and witty, and it's just constantly sort of little jibes and digs at sort of various musical theatre things over the years.
And I think also realising how strong we needed the cast to be at dancing as well. It's not just the singing and the acting. When we have the space for the dancing, it was like, okay, we need some people who can really dance.
We'll be talking show-stopping moments in a little while.
Excellent.
No, but all right. I mean, there's some bang, 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 big scenes, big dances, big music. But let's talk the score a little bit, if I may.
Yeah, for sure. So I'd heard Show People before, and like that was one that I was quite familiar with going in, but then listening through the rest of the show, I ended up loving it. Like Tough Act to Follow is one of my favourite musical theatre songs ever now. Just the whole coming on, and it's just this massive jazz moment, and then it fades away. I basically, the original orchestration is for 15, and we couldn't fit 15, and we had to cut it down to a band of 8. This was my first ever like.
But everyone's got 2 hands, can't they multitask?
I did a show choir this year where I had to do a little bit of orchestrating and a little bit of writing out parts, but that was mostly compiling parts. This one I had to properly reorchestrate for. I got a second keyboard player, so we're playing the missing orchestra parts as well as the piano parts, and then all the instruments, like I have saxes going, for example, in that way, da 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 dum da da da, so they're going between these bass lines and these soprano lines, and it took a long time. It took a really long time, and it's been something I've been working on over the last 2 months, but I've really, really enjoyed it, and I'm really, really happy with it. It's such a Kander and Ed, they kind of wrote this musical, and I feel like the scores just kind of wrote themselves, kind of like they're just so good. They just put some stuff on a page, and it was just amazing, and it's.
I
so
bet they
much
did
fun.
work quite hard on it, though.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
but
because the simpler
like,
it is, the harder it is, isn't it? I mean, that's
they just naturally just wrote such a intricate, beautiful score, and I've so enjoyed playing it, even though the piano parts are very difficult.
Although you orchestrated some of them, of course. So. Here's a question though: what's hidden in that score? Because there are a few jokes which the audience can or can't get, depending on how much. There's a brief moment of Chicago, one of their other shows. Yeah. And that suggests a certain kind of feel. But there are other gags in there. There are other musical interlacings as well, aren't there? And as I say, these leitmotifs. I mean, how important is it for you as an orchestrator then to sort of really emphasise those things, or do you actually let them sit on the bed and let people spot them? Where does the emphasis come?
I think mainly what I tried to follow with this was kind of just making as good a replica as what I heard on different productions of it, like watching people do it, especially professional productions, and also kind of the original audios, what kind of melody lines need to be conserved, and kind of delegating them out to, like, you know, we couldn't fit a trombonist, so giving those trombone parts to a saxophonist.
And a slide handle.
Yeah, but then there's a really nice moment with I Miss the Music, which is, you know, the more you think about it, the lost writing partner, it's really emotional, and it's really, really sweet. Yeah, it's just lovely.
But there's some also, I mean, forgive me, there's the early song where Christopher Belling, the director, is actually auditioning the lyricist, essentially, to be the lead when that vacancy arises. That song always reminds me of Sondheim. It sounds much more Sondheimian to me than Kander and Ebb. There's a couple of orchestrations. I don't have the terminology. I don't have the lexicon for music. I'm afraid I'm a words man rather than a music man. But I like my music, so I'll try and describe it as best I can. But it's there's something about the orchestrations and the tonality that seems to me to be Sondheimian. I mean, you can say, no, that's nonsense. You're a silly old idiot. I do get it.
I get what you mean with kind of the way it uses the chromatic notes. And in the original, it's an oboe. But we don't have an oboe, but suddenly this oboe comes in with this one note. And I do very much see what you mean. Yeah. It's like it's chromatic in that way. It kind of stands out a little bit in this musical, which has a lot of really brassy numbers. But I mean, this musical has such a variety of things. In the Same Boat is just its own world. Kansas Land, just suddenly you have this completely Wild West number. It's brilliant.
We'll come back to the music, but I'd like to come back to the narrative and the direction, if I may then. Forgive me, let's talk about the big showstopper numbers. Now, for the most part, they are actually in the show that's being put on, rather than the environment of curtains. So they're in Kansas Land. You know, That Away is the one that really sort of immediately comes to mind. It's a sort of, I mean, at one level, it could be a terribly tiresome song because it's got a lyrical joke in it, which is essentially that almost every line rhymes with, or nearly rhymes with, the word that away. And therefore, there are a couple of, I'm not going to say false rhymes, because it's playful and therefore is allowed to play around the sound. So they're not absolute homonyms, I suppose, or rhymes anyway, but they are but in the region of, you know, Attaboy and That Away don't quite work, but actually by then you're bought in, you know the audience say, right, I'm with this. But also it could be constraining lyrically, but then it's not really about the lyrics, is it? Actually, it's really about the fact it's a music and dance number. So, you know, once again, you've got different pulls. You know, how important is it to get the lyrics right, or do you actually say, right, we're just going to let them float, and here we go? And this is a question to the three of you, because actually, as a show-stopping number, it's got to be the directors, it's got to be your choreographer, who isn't here today, and your musical director working, I hope. I was going to say in tandem, but there's four of you, and that's two tandems.
Yeah, I mean, I think for some of the songs we definitely focused a lot on the lyrics, like He Did It and in the Same
the diction.
Yeah. But I think actually for That Away we did just kind of let the lyrics float and more focused on creating the saloon number and the atmosphere of that for that number anyway.
Yeah.
It's a weird, I think that's always a weird one. I think it doesn't really add anything to the plot line in any way, really. And it comes at a point where they're making sort of advances in the murder mystery, and then all of a sudden out of nowhere this random number comes in.
Rehearsals.
Yeah, exactly. And just, I don't know, it's a weird one, I think. And also the big joke is sort of that they're supposed to be making fun of these sort of golden age musicals, aren't they?
Yes.
So I think that the forced rhymes like Paraguay and Mendeley sort of works quite well, because it's sort of making fun of these old musicals that were sort of all about nothing, a bit camp and just about nothing, really. Well,
where the songs weren't integrated.
Yeah,
because you're right, it's not an integrated song in that sense. I mean, obviously it's made to work, because it shows you the development of, you know, the pressure in the background, but actually that's contextual, that's not plot so much. But it is also relief, isn't it, which is often what these things were in the 30s and 40s and 50s musicals. But actually you've had a bit of plot, we don't want to worry you, but, you know, let's have a lovely number.
No, that's not a song, yeah.
So it does do that, but it's terribly high energy. It's a full ensemble. It's the male and female cast. Female cast principally. There are costume elements. You know, there are detachable skirts a la Bucks Fizz. You're far too young to remember Bucks Fizz. But
I've never seen them be. I cannot see.
You're in a different room.
I cannot see the dance for That Away. I haven't seen the dance for Tough Act to Follow. I've never seen the Kansas Land dance. They were doing the fight call yesterday, and I was just like, you do that? I didn't even realise. But about That Away specifically, yeah, it's a massive ensemble number, and when they go, don't blow your kiss away, oh, da 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 da, like when they have these kind of intersecting lines, the words aren't really nearly as important as the kind of the emphasis on like the lines going between the upper voices and then the lower voices, and it's all mingling,
the
and then the
soundscape,
harmonies, and yeah, exactly.
more than the individual elements
much
of it, I suppose.
It's really, really nice. Yeah.
It's also got what I would call a deceptively easy sound. Once again, it's got at the beginning, at least, it's boom diddle 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 boom boom boom, which sounds like a band marching. You know, it's quite an American sound, but also quite a simple sound. And of course, then the show's that piece showstopper stops being simple in any way, whilst at the same time, sort of sounds like it is simple. Even you know, to me, it's a tremendous sort of build-up of a, you know, it is sort of. It's also one of the very few songs I think I've come across in musical theatre where there's any suggestion of male arousal, I should say, by the way. There's the, and of course in a British context, that's more so, isn't it? Because there's a line where the female characters are dancing slinkily. I think that would be Bob Fosse style-esque. And that's the point of it. They are trying to sort of, you know, be exciting for the men, and the men make a reference to what's this stirring in my pants. But of course, pants is a trouser in America.
Yeah,
something quite, just a little bit more intimate. Therefore, for a British audience, I was talking to an American woman the other day in a queue, like you do in Edinburgh. Not about curtains, we were just talking about a totally different show. And we got around to the remarkably hot weather in Edinburgh this year, and she said to me in her very nice American accent, "Oh yeah, I've given up my woolen pants." And I had to explain to her that she had been much more intimate than I'd been expecting. And of course, she didn't mean that at all. She was just changing her trousers. Anyway, we will get back to the plot. So that away. Let's talk Bob Fosse then. And now our choreographer's not here, but obviously it's a big dance number. For the three of you, you know, how much involvement do you have in the choreography as directors and musical directors? Because it's all collaborative. Yeah. And it's not Bob Fosse per se, but there is something about angular movement before they start running across the stage that naturally makes one think of Bob Fosse, and Bob Fosse is a very particular kind of choreography and almost sets itself up, I always think. But that's a debate for another day, perhaps.
I mean, we attended the choreography rehearsals, but Rose just has choreographed all those really big numbers.
And her surname?
Rose Roberts.
There we are.
And she does all kinds of dance, but she does a lot of ballet. And I think you can see that in some of the numbers, but also she's choreographed things in this that she's never done before. So she has never choreographed ballroom, and then she choreographed Tough Act to Follow. So she's been fab. But yeah, I can definitely see Fosse in it as well. But yeah, she did those big numbers, and then we kind of had some input on the choreography in the numbers that are more kind of crafted movement, like Women's Dead, and he did it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
What kind of man, that kind of thing. That was
crafted
more
movement, is it really?
Yes.
But I think that's a lovely phrase. I really think that says something.
Yeah.
Please elaborate.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just what was sort of a shorthand way of referring to
director's choreography.
Exactly. I mean, we're certainly not choreographers.
That's easy for you to say.
So yeah, I don't know. It's just sort of they're still moving, but it's somewhat less than choreography.
Yes, it's not dance per se, is it? No, but movement. But movement is dynamism. And that's really important for us as audience members, and it must be for you as the three who rule. Let's talk then a little bit about another showstopper, which is in the same boat, which is slowly assembled across the course of the piece, rather marvellously. And it's an old trick at one level. You know, Irving Berlin was writing one melody and then a counter melody, and then, you know, having one character sing this, the other character sing the other, and then, gosh, they sing it together at the end and it all fits. You know, that was happening in the 20s. You know, so it's nothing new. The best example from Irving Berlin is from Call Me Madam, where exactly that, Ethel Merman outsings someone else. I can't even remember their name, but it's essentially that concept. But it's all over the place. Sondheim does it. You know, it's an absolute staple, and yet it sounds amazing. It is amazing. It's a clever trick to have disassembled it and then rebuild it over the course of the piece. But what I particularly like here is that obviously the musical joke is explained. That the composer is having to write lyrics because his lyricist is now appearing in the show, so he's using the same orchestrations and band parts, so he's writing new lyrics that fit the original orchestrations, which means that they will all fugue, or whatever the word is, but they'll all fit together later on. And that's sort of explained. What is less obvious, and yet is there on the stage for us all to see, is the fact that you've also got the three sets of choreography on movement from the three different versions we see at different times, which also merge together visually. And actually that, I think, is the great conceit of that piece. Or so it seems to me, that actually, you've got the boys, when they do their bit, they sort of come and snake down the stage around the back and then sort of diagonally around the front, and then later on you've got, for the third iteration, you've got the three women singing at the front of the stage. Yeah. So, and then there's the first one, the three women in a canoe, and their path is a slightly different one, and you put them together and no one hits anyone else on the occasion when it's put together.
That was a chaotic rehearsal.
People were hit the first time we
there were paddles everywhere.
There's a really deceptive thing about the fact that within the show it's the same orchestra parts, because they always talked about the same orchestra parts, and I was like, these are not the same orchestra parts at all.
Each of them
it's an absolute lie. Each of them requires their own orchestration and their own writing, but that's fine.
Was the drummer doing the same thing?
No, they are quite
totally different.
They just have the same chord progression. There are different melodies being, and one of the things I really enjoy, actually my favorite bit of flute. So I play the flute a little bit in the show as well. One of my favorite bits of flute is, with my head, if you will, but is in the same boat too. Actually, I've got this lovely flute line that's just in there. It's just nice. They are different.
Well, forgive me, you've pulled the wool from my eyes, or the scales have now fallen from my eyes, but it seems deceptive, and yet it comes together and it's brilliant.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
But it's interesting that you said there was sort of, and it's understandable, chaos at least, or at least order to be found.
Yes.
And how long did that take? I mean, because that's a mixture of everything, isn't it? It's dance, performance, getting it together, doing it separately and apart.
I think Rose, so when we initially discussed that one with Rose, I think she always planned for them to do the originals, as you say, like chart them along the original paths, and then so we did all of them sort of before, and then it was put together, and yes, it was chaotic at first, but it wasn't like everyone was learning it from scratch. They were actually just doing the thing they'd already done. I think the singing maybe.
Yeah, singing took a bit of time because not only are you singing stuff you've sung before, but it's actually different again, and it goes up, it modulates up, and the three girls, they have to kind of lead that modulation with some really crunchy dominant fifths in the next key, and it's tricky also to get them in time. That was one thing that we practiced a lot with that song, because you've got so many varieties of rhythm, and everyone has to kind of keep to their own lines, and finding yourself on your own line while doing your own choreo while everything else is going on. It was challenging, and it took a little bit of time. We rehearsed starting a little bit slower, putting everything back together, and then bringing it up to speed, and that was really fun. I think we took a full 4-hour rehearsal to put it together.
But it pays off. I mean, that's the point. It is one of those ones where actually I mentioned the word layered earlier. I mean, this is a really good example of something that for the audience looks like it's bits pre-built fitting together, and what you're really telling me, of course, is that whilst there's an element of that, you've still got to jiggle it around a bit to make it all hook in a way that looks super smooth. I mean, it was a great success. No, I think it's fabulous. I think everyone involved in that, from you to your orchestra to your cast to your choreographer.
Brilliant. I mean, they're brilliant in that. I think it's my favourite bit of the whole show. I think it just sounds incredible, really.
It sits very easily on the ear.
Definitely. And also there's so many of them in it, it's just quite so joyful, because they're all sort of on stage.
A few of the dead characters resuscitated
are resurrected
for
that special moment and then promptly disappear.
Indeed, everyone is on stage for that.
The people who've been doubling, as it were. Yes, because they were bumped off earlier or whatever. Yes, fine.
And even the members of the production team, like Christopher Bellingham, they're even at the sides watching it, singing along, because by this point we figure even they probably know the words to In the Same Boat.
They should do.
There will never be an end.
They've been hearing so much of it, exactly.
Yeah, it is nice, because a lot of rehearsals it felt like we were almost doing two shows, because it is a lot of the time the cast of Kansas Land and then the production team. So in the numbers where everyone comes together, like show people as well, they are nice and they're fun.
Can I ask you a directorial question, just from a viewpoint? Which is that actually, obviously, exactly as you say, there's a show and then there's the show where they're performing within it. Kansas Land is their Oklahoma-esque style, much more fun than Oklahoma, if I may say. But can you see enough of Kansas Land from your position as directors and musical directors to have a sense of what that show might have been like if it ever floated off as a real show?
No, it took us ages to realise even who is it Rob Hood or is it Alan O'Dell? And I think we finally worked out that Rob Hood is the real person and Alan O'Dell's the disguise, but that took us months to work out. No, I mean, I really like all the bits of the show within the show, but I don't really have a sense of what the plotline is.
There's something about getting deeds. I mean, that's what In the Same Boat is about, isn't it? It's making it to the county court, whatever it is.
In Wichita, yeah.
I must say, I'm sure I've seen a plot which is essentially that from the Dukes of Hazzard in the 1980s, which is. I'm not saying there's any lifting or anything like that, but there was a standard TV plot from South America, from Southern America, the Southern American states, which seem to be, we're going to lose our farmstead unless we can prove our title deeds, and we've got to get to the registration part of the court building, and it closes at 5, and the villains are blocking the road. Luckily, we've got a car that can do wheelies and goodness knows what.
Yeah.
But so I'm imposing my ideas of what that might be.
Yeah. It's also confusing because obviously in Robin Hood ends up with Maid Marian, whereas Madame Marian does not end up with Rob Hood. It's the school mum that ends up with Rob Hood.
Yes, that's true, of course, yes.
So I don't know why they would have made that decision, but I mean, it doesn't matter, obviously, in the grand scheme of things.
Well, it works for the Curtains plot, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, it's more for the benefit of the Curtains denouement than the Candersland denouement.
Yes.
Absolutely, quite.
Yeah. I think of all the numbers of the show within the show, Wide Open Spaces is so significant, because I think when I first watched Curtains, and then the exact same theme came around at the end, and they said their lines, and it was like, you came to us as,
it has its double meaning, doesn't it, all the way through?
I was like,
I mean, it's got a marvellous book, Curtains. Right, let's ask a question. You've mentioned him, Christopher Belling, the flamboyant British director. Got to ask you a question. This is a question I like to ask people. Do you think, and there's no right or wrong, is Christopher Belling a good director?
It's
narratively,
a good question, isn't it?
In some aspects.
He's supposed to be critically acclaimed, isn't he?
I'm not sure on this production that he is, but he stays around with his cast when everything's going wrong. I mean, a lot of the time he obviously wants to leave and he says he wants to resign, but he sticks through it, and I think that's a good thing to have in a director, that he sticks by it through to the end.
Yeah, I don't know. I think he's good at taking credit for things.
He says so.
Possibly, in fact, by his own admission, because all of the show's improvements really come from Chaffee, don't they? Yeah. Rather than Christopher Belling.
Yeah, but at least he doesn't shoot down the ideas. He does go, "Oh, I agree," and
I'll take the credit.
Yeah,
that's true. Yeah.
I have a view myself. Do you have a view?
Not particularly.
Fine. No. Well, I will just offer mine. I'll tell you what I think. I think he's a good director. I think he's a bad dramaturg. I think Chaffee is a dramaturg, but not really a director. And I'll tell you why I think he's a good director. It's because when the show looks like it's going to close down because their leading lady has been killed, it's he who has the idea that the lyricist should step in. He's there to save the show. He also encourages her. He does quite a lot of what I would call the pastoral care elements of the director, which you will all be aware of. Human beings, whether they're on the stage or not, in the rehearsal room before they've been cast, whatever it is. But so I actually think he is a jolly good director. And there's a sense that actually the show was brought down by the terrible leading lady who disappears very early on in the first act. Actually, there's a core of a show there, and it only needs a little bit of recasting. That's only my view.
That's a good point.
Yeah. I don't think he's a dramaturg. I don't think he's got any kind of those developmental skills. And that's clearly where.
Right. Okay.
Although Chaffee's clearly giving that up to become an actor now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've been talking about the narrative. We've touched on the choreographer, and we've looked at the music. Let's talk about the casting. I liked your cast a great deal. I appreciate that the way your society works is that people sort of apply, and then you presumably pick from what you've got.
Yeah.
How easy was it to match people? And presumably your orchestra is similar, is it?
Finding banders, connections and friends, or people who'd be interested or available and willing to do it for free.
But you get Edinburgh as well. Yes.
Well, the way the audition process works is that we have sort of open general ones that people come to, and then we do a second round with a smaller group of people that are invited back.
Yeah.
Long listing and short listing.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
I mean, it was quite challenging because because it was kind of exam season, some people had gone home away from Edinburgh. So we actually had a lot of people sending in online videos, and so some of them were kind of taking a chance on putting kind of Beth, who played Carmen, and Minnie, who played Bambi, together as mother and daughter, because Minnie was applying online, and then we were like, okay, we hadn't seen them interact as mother and daughter together, but they work
Oh, they do.
fab together.
The antagonism's all there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Gordon, who plays Christopher Belling, he was also in Italy at the time, so he was sending in his tapes from some glorious Italian terrace.
Yeah, and then we had Anya. Anya, who played Georgia, she had stood on a sea urchin, so she couldn't dance at the time of the auditions as well.
Yeah.
So, but her voice was just fantastic.
The other end was working, that's right.
Yes, yeah.
But it was really challenging. So many talented people auditioned, and
I've got to
it was
ask you
really
this.
enjoyable.
Is your Choffy actually American?
Yes.
He is.
I thought so,
Yeah.
because I went to see it with a friend, and I said, I think he's American, because the accent was so perfect all the way through.
Yeah.
And my friend said, no, I don't think so. I think he's just an actor putting it on. So I shall have great pleasure going back on that one.
And he was sort of an immediate. I mean, he just looks like Choffy. Do you know what I mean?
You could believe
so
he comes from the
perfectly-
police force.
Yeah. He just fits the part so naturally. There
We were
was
thrilled
not
when he
really any
auditioned.
question
Yeah.
that he was going to get that part. Really.
We had so many strong auditions, which meant that we had such a strong ensemble as well.
Yeah.
Each of those ensemble girls and boys, like they dance so well, they carry their acting so well, and their little bits are also really nice. So
Yeah,
really, I'm
moments.
really happy with our cast as a general as well.
And the other thing about the casting, because in some other productions we'd seen, we felt that the kind of the Oscars and the Sydneys and the Johnnies were all very similar, and they were hard to kind of differentiate actually when you're watching. So we're very happy with how
Different yours
unique
are.
and individual.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Because they're sort of blank. I think Oscar especially is a bit of a blank slate. There's not really much in the productions I've seen of Curtains. He's can often be a bit nondescript.
Yeah,
So
he's
we
a hanger-on
wanted-
to...
to Carmen.
Thank you.
So we wanted people who
Could bring something.
could bring something to those characters, which we got. So.
I thought your Johnny was excellent, actually.
Yeah.
I was so happy when they auditioned. Like I was like,
Yeah.
that's Johnny. We have to.
And had that sense of responsibility, but also the drudginess of being the person who looks after the stage.
The
And
impatience,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, quite.
Yeah.
No, I absolutely bought into them. Absolutely. Sometimes you can see different options for a cast. You can think, well, if I have that person and this person, that sort of pushes the directional feel in this way, which means I sort of can't have this other person. But actually, if I had this other person and put that person there, I could get... Sometimes there are paths not travelled.
Yeah.
Were there any sort of paths not travelled musically or directorially or even casting-wise? I'm not asking for, yes, we didn't list the following and here's why.
I think there was some kind of people that could have played multiple parts because they're just they're really strong at acting. So yeah, in that sense, but I think in the way it ended up, I now can't see it any other way.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
Now, this is quite a reductive question, but I'm going to ask it of each of you, because sometimes it brings out quite interesting answers. What is the bit you most like about Curtains from your vantage point? You know, what bit of the score or orchestration or performance do you like musically? What bit of dancing or stagecraft or just something in the narrative that's leapt out at you? I mean, there's no right or wrong answer. It's really what do you like best?
As in of our production of it, or
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I think from your production of it, but it could be from the narrative, which is obviously there anyway.
Right. Yeah. I mean, for me, it's The Woman's Dead. I think that is
exactly the same thing.
I think in the musical itself, that is just. I mean, I think that's one of Kander and Ebb's finest works. I think it's absolutely brilliant. I mean, every line is just so funny. And when we were doing the rehearsal in which we did that, it was just so much fun. Because we sort of made it into a sort of funeral and graveside and all of that thing. Yeah, I just love that.
I think, when we had a lot of fun brainstorming ideas for that one, and then when they actually worked, that was a very fun rehearsal, and I love the harmonies at the end of that song as well, and Choffy's first entrance, I think, is my favourite moment in the show, and I love That Away as well. I think that was my favourite song when I first heard the show. That blew me away.
Just coincidentally, this is a piece of arcane trivia, in the 1950s there's a very rare recording of a 1950s comedy band leader called Charlie Chester, who sang a song about cowboys going off in a posse to look for a villain in this case, called That Away. And it doesn't do the same thing at all, but it does rhyme that away a couple of times. Now, there's no suggestion at all that I'm sure Kander and Ed weren't listening to 1950s British radio variety acts. But it is interesting that I stumbled across that a few years ago and thought, as I say, I'm a terribly dull man.
That's interesting, yeah.
And what about you?
I think That Away was the first thing that I reorchestrated because I love it so much, and it was a massive undertaking. But it was the song that first stood out to me was Tough Act to Follow, and after all this time, it is still my favorite.
You still love it?
I think I'm not a dancer. I wish I did more dance. I'm hopefully starting to dance more. But the only type of ballet dance I have done is ballroom, and I remember being there in the choreo rehearsal, and I was dancing it with our choreographer because she needed someone to demonstrate it with her, and I really, really enjoyed that, and that was the first kind of dancing I felt comfortable with at all. Goodness. And it looks so gorgeous, and I love the score for it, and it's like one of my favourite moments in the show, yeah.
And then the follow-up question is, what has the show taught you? And that can be anything. It could be something from the show or something you've acquired doing the show.
I mean, kind of from doing the show, I've not done Fringe before.
Yeah.
So that has been a massive learning curve, especially the getting in and getting out in 15 minutes. We have learned so much about that. And then, that has impacted the way that we've had to do the show and how can we do this show on a scaled down level because we can't get these things in and out. I think I've learned a lot about how to do such a ambitious show on a smaller scale and how to be creative with that.
And how to be successful, if I may say. It's an it's a great success, this show.
Thank you.
I mean, for me, it's so I've never directed before. I've only ever sort of acted in things. So
I've forgotten that. Yes,
it's
quite.
Definitely lifted the scales in terms of what goes into making a production work and the amount of sort of brain work that has to go on behind the scenes, like outside of the rehearsal room. It's just definitely taught me that directing's a big project.
That word keeps coming up, I notice.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's been good though. It's been great.
I think, obviously, as Katie was saying, this is first Fringe, so getting all the band equipment into the pit, there'll always be like this thing missing, and I'll have to ask our product manager, okay, we need this, and then he'll sort it out, and then I'll be back, and it's always a stress, and there's so many cables to set up and everything, and that's been an experience. But also scaling down a show, doing the reorchestration, I think is the main thing that I got from this, and I really, really enjoyed it. And I think I've learned so many things. Like the first things I reorchestrated are so much, I'm less satisfied with them, and I've gone back over them, done them better as I've kind of gotten skills.
As your own sophistication in this area has improved.
Yeah.
Well, that makes perfect sense. I mean, the fact that, forgive me, the three of you weren't expecting to do curtains, in many ways it's your first experiences of all various elements of it, and you were doing it at the Fringe in the full version. It comes down to the fact this is still a magnificent, successful production of curtains. I enjoyed it from beginning to end. I thought it was witty. I thought it did all the things I wanted a musical to do, and I know this musical terribly well, and it delivered on all of the things I normally expect a musical to do in spades. And the very fact that you've all told me that, I've not directed before, or I've not orchestrated before, or whatever it is, I've never done ballroom with a choreographer before, is a first in these conversations for me, but, I'll write that one down and look at it later. But the fact you've all sort of come at it and just achieve success in yourselves and the project collaboratively, I think, if you don't mind me saying, is a huge testament to your skills individually and as a group. So I'm going to probably say thank you so much for bringing curtains to Edinburgh, and I shall bring this conversation about curtains to an end. But seriously, it's been lovely talking to the three of you. Thank you so much for giving up your time, and I hope this shan't be the last time I see you here in Edinburgh or elsewhere in these or various other capacities relating to musical theatre. But seriously, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
It's been
lovely.
It has,
It's been great.
Musical talk. Well, there we are. That was Falkmeyer, the musical director, and Katie Slater and Patrick Hall, the co-directors of Curtains. Produced by USOG, that's the Edinburgh University Savoy Opera Group, and you could have seen that last summer at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe. I did see it, and I thought it was wonderful. Very good. It's an ambitious show to put on, and it was essentially the full version, not a trimmed down version, and that's always a wonderful thing to see. And indeed, it was. Well, I hope that's whetted your appetite to hear a bit more about The Wonderful Curtains by Kander and Ebb, because that's what we're going to get next week, and which has allowed me to name these 2 episodes, I think rather cleverly, A Pair of Curtains. Next week, Tim Saywood and I will be talking about the streamed version of the recording of the London touring version, which could have been seen in the United Kingdom between October 2019 and March 2020, until it was curtailed because of the COVID lockdown. It was a treat to see the show in lockdown, and I must say it really did pick up the spirits in my case, but also it was a delight to talk about it with Tim Saywood, who saw it as well. And I hope that you'll enjoy next week's episode, therefore. But it's only fair that I give you a week off to ponder the opportunity that you're being given to hear that conversation, and I'll do that by finishing this episode so that we can leave it 7 days until the next one comes out. Now, if only there was a kind of word that represented curtains to any conversation, or indeed in this case monologue. Well, I think I might have it. Let's see if it works. I'm going to say it now. Goodbye. Yes, it has. It has worked. This episode of Musical Talk, edited and presented by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2023. To find out more about the world of Musical Talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our website www.musicaltalk.co.uk or subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can at Musical Talk Thos. Oh, convenient. Hello. We haven't started yet. I'm
Great.
just doing
Sorry,
the terrible run-up.
No, that's fine.
I'm just saying that it's done as live, but I do edit. So if there's anything you say and you rather it hadn't been said, you can say, no, can we just roll that bit back and we'll take that out.
Okay, yeah.
And there'll be a short extract in a kind of here's what you can still see in Edinburgh show, and then the full interview will go out in the next few weeks and months. Over God knows when is the answer, because there's a schedule.
Yeah.
Should we get into it? Is that all right? Fine.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
do you mind moving? Do you mind all moving? I
Yeah,
assume you're still professionally talking.
Yeah.
Good. That's nice. I'm going to ask you all to come in as close as you can, just to the mic. I mean, it's
Okay.
relatively good sound here, but there will be people. If anyone walks through with a trombone, we'll stop. The general crowds are fine. It's all part of the Edinburgh ambience, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, you've seen the silent disco. There might as well be. I'm going to ask you each to give me a level. Would you mind starting?
Yep. Hello. I'm Katie, co-director.
What did you have for breakfast?
I have had half a croissant.
What did you half have for breakfast?
Yeah.
Lovely. You, sir?
I had some very questionable Chinese leaf with eggs. That wasn't very good in the end, which was a bit sad.
Oh, right, okay. So far, a number of disappointments. Can you save the day?
I just had a couple of slices of toast. Very standard breakfast.
But did you find them satisfactory?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Well, you win.
I'm easy to please though, I think.
Easy to please at breakfast. I have no further comments. Right, okay. To be honest, I will move the microphone around a little bit because I'm going to start. If each of you, I don't know what order you want to do it in, your name, your involvement at the show, one of you mentions the show, and then we'll take it from there. Is that all right?
Nice.
What's your billing?
Shall I go first?